What does recent history of the Joe Schoen era tell us about how the New York Giants might approach the draft? We have that and more coming your way next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And thank you to those of you who make us your first listen of the day. And today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay tuned for the Armada Player of the Week later in the show. All right, folks, on today's Locked On Giants podcast, the draft is getting closer. So, yeah, we're going to talk more about the draft. Like, everybody's not sick of it already, but there's plenty of more analysis to be done, scoops, you name it. We're going to cover it here on Locked On Giants. So, on today's program, we're going to talk about how the Giants' approach seems to be shaping up and just some clues and some, things that I'm kind of picking up. We'll see if they come to fruition, but I'm going to put them out there and just based on some of the evidence that's coming through. So we'll talk about that. Then in segment 2, what can we learn from what the Giants have done in the past drafts? Now, again, this is the 4th draft for Joe Schoen, general manager. So we'll take a look at what he did in the first 3 drafts and what lessons do you think we can pull from those? What can he pull from those with regards to how he approaches this year's draft? Then finally, in segment 3, we're going to do fact or fiction as it relates to the draft. All right, so we've got a lot to cover. Let's jump right in. All right, let's talk about the Giants' approach to this draft. Now, obviously, you ask Joe Schoen every year, what's your approach to the draft, and what's he going to tell you? Everybody know? Anybody know? He's going to say best player available. Folks, a lot of times best player available and need do marry up. All right. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen more than probably GMs are willing to admit. So if you're the Giants and you're looking at the roster, the state of the roster, what do you need to add to this roster? There might be some clues here. All right. So let's start with the offense. We all know that the Giants need a quarterback of the future. Okay, that is not a surprise. I'm not telling you anything new when I say that. The Giants, if you look at their offense, other than for some depth on the offensive line with Stone Forsythe and James Hudson III and a couple receivers who are probably more special teamers, the Giants really didn't tweak their offense all that much. So they're basically, if you look at it, they are right now projected to return 10 of the 11 starters from week 1 at last season. The one exception, of course, being quarterback. So that's kind of telling, I think, because obviously, I've been saying, for those of you who have asked me, what are the Giants going to do in the first round at pick number 3? Do I think they'll pick Shedeur Sanders or another quarterback? Folks, they're going defense. All right. Likely it's going to be Abdul Carter. Now, as I record this, and I record this on Thursday night, Abdul Carter underwent a medical recheck out in Indianapolis, which they do every year. They have a medical recheck on guys who developed issues or had issues coming into the combine. And Carter got some good news. So if you've been watching me every day, if you're one of my everydayers, you know I've been saying that the one thing that I think could potentially screw the Giants up if Carter is on the board and they pass on him, that would tell us that there is concern about the medicals. Now, Carter still obviously is going to need to be checked by the Giants medical team. They tend to be ultra conservative. So it again, if Carter is on the board, the Giants pass, you know where the problem was, or where the breakdown was. If he's on the board and they take him, then we got nothing to worry about regarding the injuries that were uncovered at the combine. All right, so just going back to what I was saying about the offense. All right, the offense is returning most of its starters from last year, with the exception of quarterback. But if you go back, folks, and look at the past, all right, special teams really didn't get a huge influx of veteran talent. Defense didn't get a huge influx last year of veteran talent. So if you look at what Joe Schoen did last year on offense, and in particular the offensive line, he added veteran depth to that unit, and he was able to get starters out of that. So you look at some of the holes that they filled on the defensive side of the ball, and the defense was just as much of a problem. What approach did they take? You guessed it, veteran depth. All right, now that includes the defensive line, but they're still going to likely add a 3-tech guy, a defensive end, to line up in the future with Dexter Lawrence, because some of these guys that they sign for depth, they're not long-term solutions. Whereas, a rookie, if they draft a rookie in, say, the second round onward, they'll have that guy for 4 years, which is one more year than what most of the guys that sign are currently going to be around. All right. So, again, the Giants defense, I think it's going to get a lot more love in this draft. That's not to say that the offense won't get some love, but I suspect this is going to be a very heavy defensive themed draft for the New York Giants. Okay, now there are still people out there who say, nope, it's going to be a quarterback. It's got to be a quarterback. If they don't take a quarterback, then everybody should be fired. Okay, folks, I get the impression that the franchise quarterback is not there this year, right? Or at least not somebody that the Giants are going to invest in. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, Cam Ward, obviously the top quarterback on the board, he's not going to make it down to the Giants. If the Giants felt that strongly about the quarterback to where they got to have somebody at number 3, I can assure you that they would take him. And I don't get the sense that that's what they're going to do. I think it's going to be defense, like I said. And I go back to something else that I said to you, the first clue we got, and that was when Joe Schoen tried to acquire Matthew Stafford in a trade and wasn't able to do so. Like I said, folks, if that didn't tell you what they think about this quarterback class, I don't know what does. Now, you're probably saying, but they might be able to get their franchise quarterback in the second round or at some point at day 3. Yes, there's always that possibility, but just a gut feeling, folks, the franchise quarterback is still not going to be on the roster come the end of this draft. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I am, but I don't get that sense. All right, just based on some of the names that have been linked to them, their developmental prospects. When you think of a franchise quarterback, more times than not, you think of somebody who's, week 1 ready, NFL pro ready. And I don't think there's anybody in this class outside of maybe Cam Ward, outside of maybe you can make a case for Shedeur Sanders, who the Giants are not going to, I don't see the Giants picking. There's really nobody else that you can say that about. So quarterback, yes, they'll take one. Will that guy be the franchise quarterback, the future franchise quarterback? Most likely, I would say odds are against them, against that being the case. So that being said, we'll see how the Giants draft strategy actually plays out. And of course, I'll break that down for you now. Coming up next, what about more from the history of what Joe Schoen has done? What little takeaways and clues can we get from that? We'll talk about that right after this. Hey, Giant fans, the Armada Player of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, we're taking a look at our draft prospects to pick one guy that stands apart, the guy we believe showcases the strength and power needed to push the New York Giants forward as we look ahead to next season. This week's Armada and clear-cut player of the week is Penn State defensive lineman slash linebacker Abdul Carter. The Giants defense aspires to become a top 10 unit in the macro statistical categories, and a player with Carter's talents can help them in so many ways, from the pass rush to coverage to run defense. Adding Carter to the Giants roster potentially opens up scores of creative formations that defensive coordinator Shane Baldwin can deploy, including one of my personal favorite defensive formations, the amoeba defense. Carter's value is simply over the top. And speaking of value, when it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer. And that's exactly what I think Abdul Carter can do for the New York Giants. It's clear that our player of the week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can, in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of their outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and we've got a busy week coming up next week. I think I'm going to have another guest, another one of our Locked On hosts, Locked On Rebels host, Stephen Willis, who will tell us about Jackson Dart, who, even though the Giants probably will not get, we'll hear about Dart. We'll also hear about the other Rebels that are in the draft. It's always good to get our Locked On college hosts in here and have them talk about their school's student athletes. So that's coming up next week. Joe Schoen is going to do his annual draft presser preview. So that is coming up. That's going to be on Thursday at some point. And then, of course, I'm continuing to work to get different guests on and just, develop different content for you each day as we continue to be 5 days on the Locked On Giants podcast. All right, in this segment, let's take a look at some of what Joe Schoen has done in past drafts in terms of just overall approaches and strategies, and see if we can't buy some clues here. Now, obviously, there's always a first time for everything. There is a possibility that something that has been done every year stops. There is a possibility that something that has never been done happens or continues to never be done. So let's take a look at this, okay? First thing I want to talk about, the 7th round draft picks. Now, Shane has kind of split down the middle what he has done with 7th round. Some of them he will trade away. He will package as part of a bigger package of trades to move up in a particular round. And those 7th round picks can be very valuable for two reasons. Number one, you can throw them in. They don't, on the Jimmy Johnson trade scale chart, they really don't have any value in terms of points, but to an acquiring team, they're valuable because it can mean the difference between getting the player that you want in this, before the draft is over, and then having to compete with however many teams after the draft is over during the undrafted free agent rat race that ensues. So those 7th round picks can be valuable for those two reasons, okay, as trade chips, and also to get those guys, those desired guys who otherwise would be undrafted free agents unless you use the 7th round pick on them. Okay, another trend that Shane has never really done before. He has not traded up from round to the previous round, all right? So in other words, we talk about the possibility of him trading from round 2 back into the bottom of the first round. That's something he has never done with the Giants, all right? Now, could that happen? Sure it can. But here's why I am not quite sure it will, even though it would make sense if you want to get a quarterback and consider him your prospect in making, or your future franchise guy. Why it doesn't make sense necessarily is because if you have, say, 15 first round grades on guys, that means there's going to be over 15 more that you don't really have first round grades on, that, they're probably second round grades. So does it make sense to trade from the second round back into the bottom of the first round when you can maybe sit and see if the value is going to be better if you stay put. It can and it can't. Obviously, if there's a guy that you absolutely want and you're afraid that he's going to get snapped up before you get on the board, and on day two, you make the move. But here's the advantage that the Giants have: they pick at the top, or near the top, I should say, of the second round, and I believe at the top in the third round. All right, so there's really not going to be, as far as I can see, a need for the Giants to trade from, say, round 3 to the bottom of round 2, or from round 2 to the bottom of round 1, unless there is a quarterback that they feel, is that borderline first, early second round pick. And I don't know. I mean, logic says that they should pick one of those guys, that there should be a quarterback that they really like, that, will be that borderline first round, second round pick. I have a feeling, and, just based on right now, I don't think they do it. And if they don't, that's going to, again, tell you about what they might be thinking of, not just this class, but next year's class. All right. But that's, for me, the biggest question mark. I'm not going to lie, trying to figure out, okay, yeah, it makes sense to trade back up into the bottom of the first round, but will they really do it given, the other needs they have? So that one I'm curious to see how it works out, as I'm sure the rest of you guys are, since, we are talking the quarterback, only the most important position on the team. All right. There are a lot of people who are of the opinion that if you want a position and you want a player, just take them. Don't worry about value. Don't worry about the round. All right. The coaches always say to the players when they come into the building, we don't care how you got here. We don't care if you were a first round pick, if you signed a 10-year contract worth $1 billion, whatever the case may be. What we care about is what you do from this point forward. Well, shouldn't the same kind of apply with the draft? If you want a player, just go and get him. Don't gamble. Just do it. Now, I understand there's the concept of value, and you don't want to, spend a first round pick on, say, a guy who has a 7th round grade. I get all that. And I also appreciate, listening to one's draft board. But I think sometimes you see general managers get too cute. They get too, they gamble a little bit too much and they end up missing out. So, that's the beauty of the draft. The draft is so unpredictable that you just never know what you're going to get. But I'm of the opinion, like I said, if you're telling these guys that it doesn't matter how you got here, then, value, if you have to stretch the value a little bit, why not? All right, Giant fans, coming up next, we're going to talk about fact or fiction draft styles. So don't go anywhere. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And in this segment, fact or fiction draft edition style. Now, it's funny because going through this whole mock draft season, at times you're like, okay, the Giants definitely need to address this position. They need to address that position. And then free agency hits and then it changes. And then you start to get closer to the draft and you start to learn who's really interested in who's off people's boards and so on and so forth. And just the opinions shift. All right. So like at the beginning of this mock draft season, everybody was saying Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders to the Giants. Now you can't really find mock drafts that are saying that as often as they were in the beginning of the year. But let's talk about some fact or fiction points here for the Giants. All right. First fact or fiction item. Will the Giants take a running back early? Now, the reason why a team would take a running back early is because we all saw last year what having a running game can do. All right. I think every playoff team last year had a decent running game, and they were able to really, do some damage against their opponents. Now, I think this is fiction, though. All right. I do not think the Giants take a running back early because it is a deep class. And I think, again, there's this word value. Okay. I know it just, it could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. But in terms of value for running back, because it's a deep class, you're probably going to find a decent running back, maybe as soon as the top of day 3. Okay. So you don't have to really, spend all your chips, if you will, in round 1. And I know there's round 1 prospects at running back, but if it's a deep class, and running back is one such deep class, interior defensive line, tight end, those are deep classes this year. You will be able to get yourself a really good player if you wait. All right. So you can prioritize some of your other needs if they have higher grades or similar grades to anybody at that position. All right. Here's another factor fiction item. Will the Giants take an inside linebacker? Now, this is something I initially thought might be the case. All right. I pointed out that Micah McFadden is in the final year of his deal. I pointed out that Bobby Okereke is not going to have any more guaranteed money after this year. Okay. So that a change at inside linebacker could be happening. If they draft Abdul Carter, I don't think that inside linebacker becomes as high of a need, right? Because ultimately, as we discussed on yesterday's show, one of the ways the Giants could potentially use Abdul Carter is in pass rushing situations where they take Micah McFadden off the field and replace him with Carter and let Carter blitz. Okay. If that happens and Micah McFadden sees a drop off in his deployment, he ain't coming back. So, you could maybe look to plug Darius Mawaso as a starter alongside of Okereke, assuming you keep him, and Micah McFadden moves on in 2026, and then you replace Mawaso with Abdul Carter. All right, so that's certainly one way I could see that position shaping up. But yeah, whereas I thought inside linebacker would be a big need for the Giants, now I'm not so sure that it is. All right, next factor fiction. Do they need another wide receiver? I feel like every year the Giants stock up on receivers of all shapes, all sizes, all skill set. This year, they've really made an effort to stock up on taller receivers. And, usually, at least in the last few years, the receiver class has been kind of deep. This year, you ask the draft analysts and experts, and they'll all tell you it's not a horrible class, but it's not star-studded like past years. So, you could make the argument that, they need a new number 2 receiver, which I'm not sure they do after re-signing Darius Slayton. I don't know that receiver is going to be as high of a deal for the Giants in this draft. Maybe it's a day 3 pick for them, but I don't think it's going to be that high of a pick for them. I really don't. I'd be really surprised on that. I get the idea that it would be nice to have another receiver to maybe, lessen the load, if you will, or take away some of the double teams that Malik Neighbors is going to face. But I can't help but wonder if maybe the anticipated improved quarterback play is going to fix a lot of what ails the Giants or what has ailed the Giants in the passing game. So this whole idea again of the Giants, do they really need to add a receiver? I'll never say that they never have to add a particular position. I don't think that's fair, to say that. But that being said, I don't think it's as high of a priority. All right. So, bottom line, what would surprise me about this Giants draft? Well, after 30 plus years of doing NFL drafts or from the Giants, there's really nothing that surprises me. Although last year, not taking a quarterback came really, really close to be a surprise. But here's what I'll say. The draft, it's never as bad as it looks, and it's never as great as it looks. It all boils down to how are the coaches going to deploy the players? Are the players going to apply themselves? Or are they going to just be glad that they made it to the big leagues and sign a big league contract? And really, that's what it all boils down to. That's what you never know what you're going to get. But I'm looking forward to the journey and seeing how it goes. And I hope you guys are as well, because it's sure going to be interesting. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Be sure to keep it here next week as we have all new episodes for you. Thanks again for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast, and have a happy weekend. And we'll see you on Monday.